Hi there. My name is Mike Gonzalez. I'm with Green Vigilante Media. And today we're here with Jason Kishineff, who was a Green Party candidate in the primary for California's 5th District congressional seat there. And then he also ran for American Canyon, California City Council. Jason, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Excellent. Hey, so can you, before we go into the reason for this interview, can you go ahead and give us a little bit of, tell us maybe what you learned about running for office?
I learned that the establishment narrative runs deep in the hearts of people, and it's very difficult to tell people that incumbents that they believe are nice guys may actually be working against them.
Right.
Really a challenge.
So I really like a lot of things you say and a lot of your ideas about our government.
Thank you.
And what I came across as we are, friends on Facebook, is that you're writing articles now. You're writing them on Medium, and
Yep.
One of the articles I saw was "We Sell Genocide," and I read that article. I thought there was a lot of things on there that needed to be said. Subsequently, I've seen a couple more articles for you. The Bipartisan Murder of the Free Press and the Single Greatest Threat to Democracy, Brown People, question mark.
Question mark.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Let's start off with the article, We Sell Genocide. In that article, you talk about the wars and military actions of the United States. Can you tell us what are the motives of the United States and our wars?
Well, it seems to me that the motives are corporate profits and just keeping perpetual war for the sake of more and more money.
Uh-huh. And do you think that comes in the form of oil?
I think it comes in the form of resources of all kinds.
Uh-huh.
It's been bananas, it's been rubber, it's been steel, it's been oil. In Korea, it's rare minerals that are used in computer parts and cell phones. In Afghanistan, I believe it's opium poppies. So it just goes on. And then wrapped up in it all are the corporations that actually make weapons.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So let me ask you this. Do we fight wars for national defense or human rights as we often portray ourselves?
I don't believe that we do. Some people do believe like that maybe World War II had something to do with that kind of protecting humanitarian interests. But the reality is that we knew what was going on and we weren't getting involved. We had no problem with Japan invading Nanking and killing a lot of people. We had no problem bombing the hell out of Dresden. So no, I don't believe that we do. We have all kinds of genocide going on in Sudan, in Rwanda, in Myanmar. We didn't even get involved because there are no precious resources there to get involved for.
Right. So you're saying we only get involved into a war or a military action because there are resources that we have interests in.
That is exactly what I'm saying. And we have no problem starting crap in order to get, like we heard last year that we had soldiers killed in Niger, and even some senators didn't know that we had troops in Niger. And so I did some research, and what's in Niger? Well, uranium and gold is in Niger. That's why we're there.
Wow. Interesting. But, certainly a war where we lost thousands of soldiers and killed many, many foreign nationals, maybe in the hundreds of thousands, maybe a million, in Iraq. Certainly we had to fight for national defense there. Is that a fact or is that a misconception?
Well, that if Saddam Hussein ever mentioned a threatening word towards the United States, I must have missed it. It's a total misconception. Iraq was our ally, until they invaded Kuwait. And George Bush Sr. decided that he needed a military thing, because the Russian economy had just fallen, and so the Cold War, which was propping up this corporate military machine, had nothing. They look around like, where can we keep this endless war going? So George Bush manufactured this war in Iraq, and thus begins this 20 or 40 years of endless war in the Middle East.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we just saw the funeral for George Bush Sr.
Yeah,
we're revisiting these issues again, and kind of looking back at his presidency.
right.
So currently, for instance, we are in Syria. Can you talk a little bit about America's interest in Syria?
The way I understand America's interest in Syria is that the United States companies, corporations want to build one pipeline that goes through Syria, and it also goes through Afghanistan. And Genie Energy Corporation is also there, which has Dick Cheney on its advisory board and some other unsavory characters. And Russia is there, and they want to build a separate pipeline. And so we're kind of battling over who gets to have the rights to build this pipeline. Russia is Syria's ally. Russia was invited. We were not. We are an invading force in Syria. We also, I believe, are there to protect the interest of Israel, because al-Assad was not so much an enemy of Israel, but he's getting old, and Israel is concerned that when al-Assad is gone, that somebody else will be less friendly towards Israel.
Oh, interesting. Right. So I always hear a lot, we're fighting Al-Qaeda in Syria. Is there any truth to that?
There is truth to that, but we funded them. We gave them the weapons. We are funding them to destabilize the government there. That is what we do. And then we've done the same. We started calling them ISIS. I'm sure that there are different groups, but that's what we do. We give them weapons. We give them the money to buy weapons. Then we set them fighting. Then we decide that these guys are terrorists and they're our enemies, and now we're going to fight the guys that we just armed. And it makes it really complicated. People say, oh, well, the Middle East situation is really complicated. Well, yeah, we help make it that way.
Right. And then also currently we are supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia in their fight for Yemen. Is there any American interest there?
In Yemen? I believe there is a small amount of oil in Yemen, but what the real interest is supporting Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has trillions of dollars, not just in our banks, but in our economy in general, and they regularly buy weapons from us. So the American establishment, we don't want to cross the Saudis. It's okay if they kill journalists. We'll keep supporting them because they give us money.
Right. And I just want to go back to the idea of fighting for human rights, that we fought to destabilize Libya, and they currently have, based on reports that I've heard,
legalized slavery
there now.
Yep.
Do you want to mention anything about Libya and our fight there and what our purpose was?
Well, Libya, before we got involved, was one of the better countries in Africa as far as social programs. They had universal health care. They took care of their citizens. The reports that I've read are that French Prime Minister Francois Hollande had an issue with Gaddafi changing his currency to be based on gold. He wanted to have an African currency, not nationalized, but an African currency instead of using our currencies. And so that's why we took him out. We made it about protecting women and children, but the women and children are now in much worse positions. So, I mean, that just belies everything. And over and over again, we get involved in these countries and we say it's about humanitarian issues, but then our results belie everything that we've said. And the people just kind of keep forgetting. And it's the same with the George Bush funeral thing, is people are forgetting, you know, that he was a war criminal. And I'm involved in conversations on social media where people are getting upset with me for pointing this out. We are celebrating a war criminal. All the Democrats, they have an organized effort to show, oh, look at this letter of how respectful George Bush was to me across party lines. He's such a sweet guy. He killed a lot of innocent people. That doesn't make him a good guy.
So when you say war criminal, we're on the topic of Libya. Libya, I don't believe we passed any kind of resolution to go to war in Libya. So how did we get the authorization to actually attack Libya?
Well, we didn't. President Obama just did it, because little by little over the years, the presidents have taken more and more liberty with their rights to call something an interest of defense or an interest of national security, and I need to send a bomb, or I need to send a police action, you know.
Right. And very much on the topics of human rights, our policy regarding Palestine and Israel. Can you talk about the human rights side of that conflict?
That's a really challenging one, because Israel was recreated in 1948, but that is where Jews see as their homeland. I'm Jewish myself, so I mean, people hear me, and a lot of times people hear people talking about Israel and say, "Oh, he's anti-Semitic." I'm not anti-Semitic. My whole family is Jewish. I love Jews. But the reality is that when that state was recreated in 1948, it was filled with Palestinians. And so they made some room for the Jews, and that there is a Palestinian portion in the north and a Jewish section in the south, and there's a neutral area in between. And there's corruption on the Palestinian side, and there's definitely aggression and warmongering. I'm not blaming everything on Israel, but Israel's Zionist policy has been to retaliate, you know, tenfold. Palestine doesn't really have a military. They do have rockets, and just demolish houses, remove Palestinians from their homes to build homes for Jews in the neutral area, which is a violation of UN law. The Palestinians get put in an open-air prison in Gaza with miserable conditions, no access to clean water, and when they protest, the Jews say, oh, they're all terrorists. You know, it's not our fault, they're terrorists, they're throwing rocks, so we had to injure, you know, more than 800 of them and kill more than 150. It's disgusting. It's really disgusting, the Zionist policy. And what I said in that article was that Zionism, which believes in a state controlled by Jews, is not compatible with democracy, because they do call it a democracy. But if you have a true democracy, every person gets one equal vote. And if there are more Palestinians than Jews, then there's a risk of Palestinian control of Israel. And that is simply not acceptable to a Zionist. And that includes American Zionists. Absolutely.
Excellent. So you're touching on a lot of points that I think we're going to touch on again.
If I may.
Sure.
Also, in that article, in that same article, I also said the same thing about right-wing nationalism in the United States, because conservative white people believe in an America controlled by white people. And that's not compatible with democracy. And they do things like voter suppression, voter ID laws, illegal voter purges, and things like that to control their power.
Right. So that actually is kind of leading to the same path. Now in South America, we've destabilized several governments, just like we've done in the Middle East. El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Do you want to touch on those?
Sure. We've destabilized a whole lot more than that. The way I understand it, the way I've learned it, is that in the beginning, and it was all about the United Fruit Company and bananas. I know you're going to mention my YouTube channel, People's Historian, later, but I was just reading in my history book that during between 1900 and 1933, we had something like 22 interventions in Nicaragua, Honduras, Haiti, Guatemala, Colombia. Like some of them, we intervened 6 or 7 times. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it just continued and continued. We support dictators. We supported Manuel Noriega, who was a drug lord. We supported strongmen. We supported Pinochet. The thing is that left-wing governments try to have less control. They try to have, more of a people's control. The resources are for the people. Right-wing governments try to control their people and try to make profits. And so the United States, we're happy to help you control your people as long as we can make a profit off you. And so we tend to support right-wing governments, including in Ukraine, where we put a Nazi in the Ukraine as a president.
Right, I did read that in your article as well. And we tend to be opposed to socialist ideas, like you said, governments that want to return the fruits of their resources back to the people.
Right, because socialist governments don't tend to want to give their resources to us.
Gotcha.
Really logical from that standpoint.
Right, understood. Hey, so also with the destabilization that's happening in places like Syria and Iraq and Libya, and also in the Americas, it's creating this refugee crisis all around the world.
It sure has.
Including the United States. And it leads me into the next article that I wanted to talk with you about, and that's the article you wrote, The Single Greatest Threat to Democracy, Brown People.
Thank you.
So
I think that title makes people think that I'm coming at it from a totally different perspective than I am.
Yeah. Go ahead and talk about that article and why you wrote it.
So yeah, we've totally destabilized Central and South America. We've made these places miserable, and Honduras is controlled by drug lords, and so all these people, they can't stand to be there, and it's dangerous, and no, I don't want to be raped again, so I'm going to take my kid and I'm going to make this really dangerous trek all the way up through Mexico and ride the top of a train, and it's horrible. And they get here, and what do? We don't want them. We kick them out. We don't let them in. We gas them at the border now. And yeah, the same thing is going on in Europe. Because we're not the only country, of course. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, they are also helping to destabilize, especially the Middle East. And so all these refugees, they've got nowhere to go. So they start going towards Europe, and they are totally overloaded. They've got refugee camps that I'm sure are just as miserable conditions as you can imagine over there, because they don't know what to do with all these refugees. And they're starting to have crimes, like, I heard about some crimes in Sweden, which is pretty far. And, people are people. You get enough people, there are going to be some criminals. But then you're also going to have people on the right saying, oh, look, there are 3 crimes, so those people are all bad. Yeah, it's pretty disgusting.
Right. They use the outlier. They use the anecdotal evidence to incriminate an entire race and culture in the case of Muslims, religion.
Right.
So you also talk about, and you touched on it when you talked about the Israel-Palestine conflict, that there's a motive to wanting to prevent immigration. And that is, that happens at the election process or voting or the makeup of right wing, left wing in these countries. Can you talk about that?
I think I touched on it already, but yeah, the right wing, the rich white people in America, brown people coming from the South tend to vote in a more liberal way. They tend to be more progressive. The word liberal is funny these days, but they tend to vote in a more progressive way. And so all these people coming up, they want to vote in a more, they're not citizens yet, but they will someday probably become citizens if we let them stay. And that will make it more and more difficult to maintain a right-wing hold on our government. And that means less power and less money for the rich white people.
Right.
And it's the same in Israel as well, and in Europe. They have to maintain control. You don't want to share power, right? You don't want to share the wealth. It doesn't matter how unequal things are.
Right. So, do you believe that a solution to our immigration problem in the United States is would be a change to American foreign policy?
That would be a big part of it. For starters, we absolutely ought to be halting our destabilization efforts all over the world. We ought to be helping these countries make their situations better. We should be, instead of sending our army to Chad to operate a drone base in Africa, we should be sending them to Chad to help dig wells and bring people clean water. Americans think that people hate America because we're free or because we're snooty or something, but really, they hate America because we go over there and bomb the hell out of them. If somebody was bombing the hell out of me, I'd be pissed too, right?
Absolutely.
I want to retaliate. You just killed my family. I'm coming for you. Absolutely.
So we create the enemies that we have.
We sure do. We sure do.
Yeah. You know, I don't know how much you've heard about a lot of what China's doing right now, but they're all over the world in a lot of these countries, helping them build infrastructure in a lot of the developing countries.
I've heard a bit about China helping rebuild in Africa. Yes.
Yeah.
I also had it recently pointed out to me that China hasn't had a war in 40 years.
Right.
Go figure. It's possible to not have a war for 40 years.
And China is really our major competitor for the, economic leader of the world.
That is true. That is true. They are a competitor. So is Japan. And it's not to say that China is some paradise. I mean, China definitely oppresses its dissidents. They definitely don't want Tibet to be a free country or Taiwan. I'm not saying China is like this perfect place, but they don't want to have wars. And people think that in America, they think that we need to have these wars because there's all these threats. But really, Iraq is not threatening us. Syria is not threatening us. The only country that came and attacked us was Saudi Arabia, and we brought them in and embraced them. We made them our allies. We said, here, buy our weapons.
Right. So one thing that interests me in that you wrote these articles is you're telling a truth that few people are hearing in the media. And this brings me to the third article that you wrote, The Bipartisan Murder of the Free Press. So can you tell us what this article talks about?
Well, it starts off talking about Julian Assange. He's kind of like, I heard about this effort, the whole effort to connect Julian Assange with Paul Manafort, which was totally bogus. And as I thought, it was shot down within a couple of days. But a week before, you had a CNN journalist at the White House who was getting out of line, whether he put his hands on the person or not. He was out of line and he was pushy. And the president took exception to that and removed his pass. And the entire media lined up to say President Trump is assaulting the freedom of the press. But Julian Assange has been in an Ecuadorian embassy in London for 7 years because people want to arrest him for being a publisher and telling the truth. And where is the media? Is the media lining up to say, you know, you're assaulting the freedom of press? President Obama was assaulting the freedom of press. No, they're not. They're blaming Assange. They're calling him a traitor, even though he's not actually American. They're saying, you know, all kinds of weird lies, that he's working for Russia, that he's working for the left, that he's working for the right. Nobody knows. But really, he's just a publisher. People leak information to him. He vets it and makes sure that it's accurate, and that it won't cause anybody harm, because there was one incident where he released stuff too quickly in the beginning of WikiLeaks, and he learned from that, you know, but that's okay. Everybody's human. So then it goes on. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it goes on to talk about the changes and what happened in the media. Under Ronald Reagan, he did away with the fairness doctrine so that we could have, that's where we got right-wing media like Rush Limbaugh, because it didn't used to be like that. You used to have to present both sides of an argument, and you used to have to take on controversial issues. So after Reagan did that, you could have right-wing media and you could have liberal media. And then under Clinton deregulated the media completely so that corporations could buy up smaller corporations, and we end up with, we have all these news channels and all these newspapers, but they're all owned by 6 corporations. And so you end up with the one video that I talked about where they have clips of all these different news anchors that are owned by Sinclair Media Group. They're all saying the exact same speech. They have the exact same script, and it shows little bits and parts of them. And sure enough, Conan O'Brien likes ice cream. Conan O'Brien likes ice cream. Conan O'Brien likes ice cream. Really disturbing stuff. If you haven't seen that video, I suggest you watch it.
I think I have, yeah, and it's pretty frightening, and it's pretty telling about how they are all lined up to say the same thing. And that's something I wanted to point out about the media. I think that article really ties in your 2 previous articles. For instance, in Vietnam, we had reporters on the ground to tell us what was happening, but currently we don't have journalists embedded in our military actions or in our wars. So it leaves the framing of those wars up to the establishment and the perpetuators of those wars. Do you agree with that?
Totally. We had the media on the ground, even in Iraq, and we had that Brian Williams famously talking about how beautiful the bombs were when they were killing people. And as the regulations kind of loosened up about how much blood you could show on TV, it got gorier and gorier, and so then they kind of just put an end to it. We don't want to show dead bodies and blood on there, and it just kind of got, I think they used that as an excuse to not tell the American public. Like, a lot of Americans probably think that we're at peacetime right now, when in fact we're not. We're not at peacetime. We're bombing the hell out of several different countries right now. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. There's no peace right now. But the media, well, they don't tell you that.
Yeah, so I think that in 2019, high school students will be graduating high school with America having been at war their entire lives.
And could be going to the same wars that their parents fought in. Absolutely.
Right. And I don't know if you mentioned this, but I think you did say it in your article that WikiLeaks has never had to retract anything that it said.
Right. Never.
So yeah, I think the control of the media and American foreign policy go hand in hand. like you said, the motive of gathering resources for the United States, and it's not about spreading democracy or human rights or the self-defense of the United States. Jason, I thank you for bringing these things to light. I think it's important. I don't think enough people are doing it. Certainly the corporate and major media outlets are not doing it. So these articles, you're writing them on a platform called Medium, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then how could we find you there?
Just by my name, Jason Kishineff.
So if you go to the website, medium.com, is that what it is? Let me see here.
Yeah,
medium.com and type in Jason Kishineff. I'll go ahead and put these links inside the video description so that we have them there.
I just published a 4th article called "The Big Lie About the Federal Budget." It's good.
You want to talk about that for a little while?
Good read. Well, it's a bit complicated for the end of a segment, but the reality is that America does not borrow money from China to spend money. We print our own money, and that federal taxes do not pay for anything. They're destroyed. So when you think about that and you put those together, you know, when you think about the bailing out the banks, Congress passes a bill, that money is simply created like that, a couple of keystrokes, bam, you have $12 trillion. It doesn't affect the economy until we run out of the resources or we hit 100% employment. So what that means is if our government wanted to have universal health care, universal college education, convert to 100% renewable energy, end poverty, end homeless, we could do all of that right now without affecting the economy as long as we don't hit 100% employment or run out of the resources.
Gotcha. So what a great thing to focus on instead of all of these wars that we've been discussing.
Right. What that means is that poverty is somebody's political choice. The billionaires, they don't want to end poverty because they profit off of us.
Right.
And that does go hand in hand with the wars.
Right. So one more thing is you've also started a YouTube channel and you want to bring real history, because I think we get a filtered history from what we learn in school, basically what's appropriate for teachers to teach us based on, I don't know who makes those decisions.
Yeah.
And so you have a YouTube channel called People's Historian.
A People's Historian, yes.
Yeah, can you go ahead and talk about that?
Well, I feel like it's my job to inform. I really absorbed in 2016 how screwed up the media was. I hadn't really absorbed it that well. So a lot of people took on that, you know, the people have to be the media now. We have to inform people. And so while this is not news, this is history, I feel like it's my job to inform. I've read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn twice, and now I'm rereading it for this YouTube channel for about half an hour. I will read portions of this, and I've started out with World War II because I think that a lot of it is pertinent now. So yeah, that's
excellent. Okay, so if you wanted to find that, you could go to People's Historian on YouTube, and I will go ahead and put that link in the description as well. Thanks for talking to us, Jason. Hey, Jason, do you think you have plans to run for office again in the future?
I'm definitely strongly considering it. In 2018, in the primary this year, I announced my candidacy like really early, and somebody else, another progressive, joined later, and I think we ended up splitting the progressive vote, and that I don't want that to happen again. So we got to make sure that we're on the same page with that. I don't want to run against a progressive.
Yeah, I think you did pretty well too, though, right?
I got 5,600 votes. I could have done better, but I could have done worse.
No, I thought you did pretty well. I was looking at some of the statistics, and you definitely, like you said, splitting the vote with another progressive. I think if you didn't do that, you'd get up there and really have a chance.
I think I would have. And because we split the vote, we allowed another independent who was not progressive to be that number 2. And I don't think he really did anything with it. It was kind of a disappointment. Although I'm not sure he would have been better, because he was anti-socialist and anti-cannabis and just a lot of things I didn't agree with.
Gotcha. Well, like I said, I appreciate you being on here, and I very much appreciate you running for office and representing the Green Party like you did. And we'll talk to you.
I appreciate what you're doing. It's important.
Yeah, and you too. We're trying to get media out there. We're trying to get the truth out there, and I think that's because I think even in that last article that you talked about the media, is Jill Stein was also censored by the media.
Yes.
I mean, of course, we know about the media blackout of third-party voices and candidates. So
she did an interview on PBS, and every time she criticized Hillary Clinton or the TPP, they edited it out so that the American people could not be informed about, what was going on. And especially with the TPP, that was really grievous. And we're lucky. I mean, I don't want to say we're lucky that we have President Trump, because that's far from the truth. But we're lucky that President Trump was against the TPP.
Yeah, I don't know if people know, it's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it was an international agreement that would have been, I believe, and a lot of people do, detrimental to the United States and the working class of the United States. And Donald Trump ran on that, and I think he got a lot of votes because of that. And whether or not he follows through with those values or not is questionable, but it's what helped get him in office.
It is questionable. There's some talk about a new version of it, and he wanted to end NAFTA, which had kind of similar problems, but then there's also talk about a new version of that. And the problem with these trade agreements is that when we pass laws that interfere with corporate profits, corporations can sue us to change our laws. And as Ralph Nader pointed out, mandatory seatbelt laws would have been illegal if NAFTA had existed when we put them in place. And I mean, you can see how that affects public safety. That's not okay. Corporate profits should not come before public safety.
And we essentially lose sovereignty. Exactly. Yes. All right, Jason, thanks a lot. And I'll put those links up, and I hope people will follow you and hear your message. And we'll probably talk to you again, because it sounds like you're doing a lot of great things.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Peace out.
Okay, peace.